Good day, everyone. Hope everyone's having a fun evening. How is everyone? I'm not too bad. I had to go to hospital this morning. Small bladder infection. Been sleepy all day, so not been very well today. Right, the latest on Nancy Guthrie. This is forever going. So, Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old Arizona grandmother and mother of today's host, Savannah Guthrie, has been missing in Tucson for 3 months after suspected kidnapping on the 1st of February. As detectives and FBI specialists now say, blood evidence at the scene points to a likely solo offender. I don't believe that. I still think there's two people involved. Um, Also, you would need someone in what I call the getaway car because, how are you going to put Nancy in the car without her trying to get out or trying to hit you while you're driving? Nancy Guthrie was last seen on the evening of 31st January at her home in Catalina Foothills, where her son in law dropped her off. By the next day, she was gone. Investigators believe she was taken from the property, and in February, the FBI released surveillance footage showing a masked man outside her home around the time she disappeared. Despite the high profile nature of the case and multi agency searches, police still say there's no breakthrough. So, where is our Nancy? Where is she? I'd like to know where she is. If you're here for the first time, you've never seen me at all, please click like, subscribe, all notifications, and share. I'd really appreciate that. And when anyone comes in and subscribes to my channel, get my tongue straight in a minute. When anyone comes into my channel and they hit that subscribe button, you become a part of my family. Yep, family. I will end up having a big family. Just don't expect me to send Christmas cards out to every single one of you. Not with the price of postage. Shut up, Harley. Harley's woofing saying, yes, do. She wants me to send everyone Christmas cards. Talking about Christmas, and we're on the 1st of May. Crazy. Right. So please come in, like, subscribe, and share if you can. I'd really appreciate that. I've got a few videos to play and sort of like a bit about her. So yesterday, I should say, Friday the 1st of May, Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed in a statement to Fox News that the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance remains active and urged the public not to assume the trail has gone cold. I've heard a lot of people saying it's gone a cold case because they are not finding any credible evidence. So people are saying, are they just trying to string us along with a little bit here and a little bit there? A spokesman said for Fox, any information related to the Nancy Guthrie case is still encouraged to come forward. Please contact 88 Crime or the FBI tip line 1-800-225-5324. The department continues to work alongside the FBI. I bet that's with Nano's sort of like begrudging that. So the question now that preoccupies both investigators and the outside experts is deceptively simple. How many people were involved in taking Nancy from her home? Do we know? I've heard personally from 1 to 2, maybe 3 at the most. On paper, multiple offenders make more sense. Retired FBI agent Steve Moore told a journalist, Brian Enton, on news station in late April that statistically, with dyslexia ain't letting me say that word, abductions involve more than one person, and many observers are right to struggle with the image of a lone attacker overpowering an 84-year-old woman inside her own home and then moving her out without any help and then putting her in the car and then driving off. I don't believe that at all. Some people rightly say it's hard to imagine a single person is responsible for doing this to Nancy. But at the same time, you just can't put all your weight down on the ice. Moore said on the Brian Enton Investigates podcast on the 28th of April, urging caution about locking into any theory too early. He added that while he believes it's more likely that it was two people, many notorious kidnapping cases in history do, in fact, come down just to the one person. So, it's just going over and over. A former FBI profiler, Jim Clemente, has revealed or reviewed available information and reached out on very different conclusion about what likely happened to Nancy that very night. Speaking on Enton's program on the 23rd of April, he argued that if more than one person had been involved in the abduction, Guthrie's abilities to struggle and the blood pattern seen would have been far less likely. I have got some videos to show you, and if I can find that one of Brian Enton, I will do. So let me just pop on my StreamYard for a second, and I will play you this one of Brian Enton. And then we got Jen Koffenaffer. I've got her video, Nancy Guthrie, and I will try and find that Brian Enton's one that he did with Profiler. So this is going to be probably over an hour easily, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours live. I get then we'll have all that to deal with as well, which I don't mind. I love it. My headphones on, wouldn't it, guys? Check you can. Oops. Let's start this again because you can't see it. Oh, things we do for lives. Good job I came back and checked. Right, let's start from the beginning. Here we go.
Hey guys, so it has now officially been 3 months since Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home in Tucson, Arizona. A lot of theories floating around about what happened. I spoke to retired FBI profiler Jim Fitzgerald. He helped find the Unabomber. He still seems to believe this somehow has something to do with someone obsessed with Savannah Guthrie.
I can't help but think that the only thing that I keep coming back to is somehow this involves Savannah Guthrie, the TV personality, and not that she did anything wrong, but something to do with her profession, something to do with someone who she's been in touch with over the years. And it may not just be weeks or months before. And I've said on other podcasts and other media hits that, in my FBI days in New York City, I had a strong connection with a retired NYPD lieutenant who was the head of security at NBC, 30 Rock. And I was up there once a month with cases involving various of their personnel, mostly women who were getting all kinds of, back then it was mostly letters in the mail or strange phone calls. I can't believe that over the years, Savannah hasn't been receiving these types of emails, social media, whatever. And I'm hoping the behavioralists, as well as the investigators themselves, are looking into every odd and effusive and fan-loving email that she received going back 5 years at least. And then, of course, after her mother comes on the show, with certain emails from certain people come up, consistently, we love your mom, or why do you bring your mom on? I think the answer to this case will lie somewhere in there. Other people talk about cartels and forced entries for purposes of burglary, robbery. I don't think it's that. This has something to do with Savannah on a stalking type scenario. And that's why this is so out of the ordinary in terms of in not having been solved, because a lot of the usual causation factors for these types of abductions, seemingly it wasn't a kidnapping for profit. I said that almost from the very first day, that it has to do something with Savannah. Again, I'm being very careful here, not that she had anything to do with it herself or her family, but there's some stalker, someone out there that couldn't get close to her, so he did the next best thing, and translate that however you choose to, and went after her mother.
Hey guys, so it has now officially been 3 months since Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home in Tucson, Arizona.
That was his one there. I I still don't like that retired FBI guy was just saying just now that he believes, it is tied to Savannah Guthrie. But it also made me wonder if it's tied to Annie, because we all know the problems they got. They'd moved into their house. They haven't paid any money on their monthly mortgage. So, it does make me wonder if it's got to do with them. So I got another video to play for you. I don't know which one to do first. Let's do the Brian Enton one. Where's the Brian Enton ones? Was that one? I've lost all my tabs. There we go. Let's bring up good old Brian back. What do you all think happened to Nancy? Do you think it was just one person that took her, or do you think it's possibly two or more? I still say there's two people because, like I said at the beginning, I can't see one person going in, taking control of Nancy, hurting Nancy, getting her out the front door, walking her down to the bottom of the drive and bundling her into a car, then essentially locking themselves in the car. What's to stop Nancy from trying to hit the driver? So, she could, if she had the strength, and I'm sure she is quite a strong, little cookie, I'm sure she would have tried doing something, unless the person that took her knocked her out. Then that might have been a thing. But there's lots of different things. We also know now what route they took when they took her. You can only go one or two ways, can't you, when you come out Nancy's? But let's play this.
Checking out my show. Really, really appreciate it. Please click to subscribe. Appreciate all the support. It's been 89 days now since Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home right here up that driveway, Tucson, Arizona. I can't believe I've been covering this now for 89 days since February.
Also go to Brian's YouTube page and like and subscribe to him and sub up if you can.
February 1st, pretty much. And you guys have seen me interview a lot of FBI profilers, retired FBI profilers, people whose entire job was to look at a case and try to figure out who the offender is. And one way that they do that is they have this database of information that they collect by interviewing criminals, by going into prisons and interviewing some of the most dangerous criminals that exist, whether it be rapists or murderers or kidnappers, abductors, you name it, they will go in and interview these people. And what's so important about that is they'll spend days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months talking to people, putting all of that information into a database. And then what they can do is when they come out and they look into a case like the Nancy Guthrie case that is unsolved, they can go back and look at all that information that they've collected on past cases and try to determine a profile of who is responsible, which is what we are told is happening behind the scenes likely right now with the Nancy Guthrie case. So I was really interested in this process and what it is actually like to go into a maximum security prison and try to essentially pick the brain of a really, really dangerous, awful human being. So that's what I'm going to get into in this episode. I want to start off by talking to Jim Clementi. He is a retired FBI profiler about this process. When you're a profiler and you have a suspect that you are able to talk to.
Okay. So in the beginning, in the early days of the behavioral science unit, which then evolved into the behavioral analysis unit, the original profilers interviewed 38 serial offenders after conviction. And the way they did that is they typically waited a certain period of time and then approached them after they felt that the offender had realized they were going to spend the rest of their lives in prison and they've lost all control over what happens to them. And they basically would, at that point, feel like they are going to eventually just die in obscurity. We used that to our advantage by basically building up their egos, telling them we wanted to study them, we wanted to learn from them. And then these offenders started to agree to be interviewed by the people in the behavioral science unit. And eventually I believe
I used this video yesterday or the day before. I'm not too sure, but it's still worth listening to again.
Evolved into empirical studies. Those were anecdotal interviews, but now, and from the time I was in the behavioral analysis unit, we developed a protocol, and I believe it was somewhere in the area of 840 questions that we would go through with every single serial offender who agreed to talk to us. And we would do that for every crime they committed. And many times that was accomplished because we basically built up their ego. Other times we were able to get the prosecutor and the judge to agree to demand that and to order that of the offender in order to do things like take the death penalty off the table. And there have been people, I think, who've complained about that because that's what the offender wanted. But that's absolutely true. It is what the offender wants. But we're using that basically against the offender. We're using that to gain more information so that we can actually profile crimes, hopefully educate people in the public and prevent these kinds of crimes from happening in the future. But also, once they do start happening, it will help us to stop serial offenders in their tracks, prevent them from going on indefinitely killing people. And so this is something that I did when I was in the behavioral analysis unit, and all my colleagues did as well. We all engaged in these studies, and we traveled to various max security prisons or supermax prisons and interviewed offenders when they would agree to do that. And those could be serial rapists or serial murderers or both, serial child abductors as well. The fact is that this is an incredibly rich source of information. We asked them questions designed to elicit not only what they were thinking when they were doing certain things. So that gave us the why, right? And we've talked about before how how they committed the crime plus the why they committed the crime leads us to who committed the crime, what kind of person committed that crime. And so it really helps us knowing all this and building up this institutional knowledge in the behavioral analysis unit that's passed down from generation to generation of profiler. This helps us read crime scenes and determine, when we see a particular aspect of a crime in the crime scene, we can say, we've interviewed X number of people. And that number went from 38 by the original profilers to about 1,500 by the time I retired from the BAU. But we can say that in a certain number, or in the majority of these cases, when somebody did this particular act, it was because of this particular thought pattern or plan or motive on their part. And because of that, it leaks out information about the offender. And so we can then tell people more and more and more about the kind of offender in our profiles of these unknown offenders.
Did you find that most of them were honest, or that they wanted to talk to you?
Well, those are two very different things. Generally they wanted to talk to us because of their ego and the fact that they were stuck in prison for the rest of their life. Their honesty, in order to ensure that, we did two things. We studied every single crime that they committed and crime scene before we talked to them. And then after we talked to them, we went back and reviewed it in light of what we heard from the offender. And by doing that, we were able to maximize the chance that we're getting accurate and reliable information from them. We also allowed them, as distasteful as it is, to basically relive those crimes in their minds. And many of them really, really liked that opportunity. And unfortunately, I mean, it's a horrible, nasty thing, but fortunately, it also encouraged them to give as much detail as possible. And that helps us in the long run solve these crimes.
I'd imagine, you had to treat them like human beings and be polite and sort of try to gain their trust. Was that ever difficult with I think about people who abducted kids and abused kids and
Absolutely. We had to build rapport with these offenders, and we had to treat them with dignity and respect. And it's literally the only way we were going to get accurate and reliable information from them. And it is extreme.
See also on here, Clemente reasoning, get my words right, come on girls, control yourself, hinges on control of what blood at the scene says about the victim's last known movements. In his view, multiple offenders should have been able to secure Nancy Guthrie quickly and keep her under control inside and outside of her property. If there was two people, you would think one of them would have control of her, complete control of her inside the house, and then bring her outside the house and would not have lost that control. Clemente said on another show But here she's clearly on the ground coughing up blood. That is so heart-wrenching to hear that, you know, the kidnapper physically hurt Nancy. And if they're physical at hurting Nancy, what's stopping them to go one more step further? And then Clementi goes on saying that description of Nancy Guthrie apparently falling or being forced to the ground and bleeding heavily outside raises a troubling image of chaotic struggle, not a tightly managed obstruction carried out by a team. Clementi also suggested that a lone attacker juggling the need to move fast, avoid detection, physically to handle a resisting victim is far more likely to lose control in exactly that way. He also pointed out what is absent. For Clementi, the lack of public indication of multiple shoe print patterns in the blood is significant. There's no evidence to me that there are more than one offender here. He said, explaining the distinct footprints from other shoes in bloodstains would have been a classic intruder of more than one kidnapper on the scene. If there was 3 different shoe patterns in the bloodstains, that would tell me something else. I don't see it. I'm not aware of that evidence. So, you know, even the FBI don't really know what's going on, and authorities have not released detailed forensic findings yet. And it's worth stressing that much of what has been discussed by former agents remained informed analysts rather than confirmed facts. Key elements of the investigations are also being deliberately withheld from the public record, something current and former law enforcement officials have said is standard practice in the complex kidnapping cases. Nothing in these televised assessments have been independently confirmed by the police, and as ever, live in investigation. Everything should be taken with a grain of salt. So let's go back and play this video.
Extremely difficult. It is very distasteful. It is, you know, it leaves a mark on your soul because you're buddying up with these people who've done horrific things. And because we are focused on the victims, it's a very, very difficult chore that we had to do. But because it is so revealing and helpful in terms of preventing future murders or future serial rapes or future child abductions, that's one of the hard things that we do in law enforcement.
Yeah, and I mentioned to you the thought of, back to Nancy Guthrie, someone like hitting Nancy, an older 84-year-old woman. Like in my mind, I almost like think that couldn't be possible. Whoever did this, if as bad as they are, like they wouldn't have done that. How could you hit an old lady? But I guess when you do what you did and you go to the prisons and you talk to people who committed these kinds of crimes, maybe you're not as naive that you realize that they will.
They've done things that are horrifically worse than that, horrifically. And part of it is they might be a psychopath and literally have no human empathy. They treat other people like they are pieces of furniture. They do not care. They do not care at all about other people. And other cases, for example, with sexual sadists, they actually want to cause and witness the suffering of others. That is what turns them on. That's what gets them off. It's a horrible, horrible thing. So yeah, there's a lot of different variations of people who we've talked to over the years who would do so much worse than that.
So all of the information goes into like a database? Is that how it works?
Well, database is, I don't know what whether they actually have a database, but they have a library of all the results of all of these interviews. It's used to train new profilers, and it's drawn from when they get a new case. And I don't know. I know there was a move to make a database, but I don't know since I left whether they actually initiated that or not.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like when you sit down and talk to these people, that seems to me like it'd be more valuable than like writing down the information.
Well, they're videotaped. Everyone is recorded, audio and video. Yeah,
okay.
So
that makes sense.
Those are all kept in the library and also notes. But because obviously there are impressions that you get that may not be very obvious from the video or the audio recording. So I think all of those insights, when you're a an experienced profiler, I think those insights are also important.
Would a case like Nancy Guthrie's be difficult because it does seem atypical, unusual? There's not a lot of old people abducted. I mean, I'd imagine like with a child abuse case or a child abduction, like we've seen that happen over and over again, sadly. But would this one be harder for the profilers?
Well, it all comes down to how much behavior is evident at the crime scene, how much pre and post offense behavior is discernible from what happened at the crime scene. And I think obviously the profilers, I'm sure, who are involved in this case have a lot more information than we do. And that, I think there's plenty of information for them to interpret, to analyze in order to build a profile. I don't know, what the level of information that they're sharing is. In other words, do we know 90% of what happened in that house, or do we know 10%? I don't know. But chances are they are holding back significant amount of information because you don't want to give everything out, because obviously that can seriously hamper the investigation.
Yeah, of course. With the behavioral analysis unit, I saw that Rex Heuermann, the Gilgo Beach serial killer, as part of his plea deal, agreed to talk with them. It made me wonder, like, because I covered Bryan Kohberger so extensively, why that wasn't part of his deal. Because there's still so many questions about his motivation and what actually happened.
Right. Well, as I explained earlier, sometimes we need to let them ferment a little bit in prison before we even approach them. And I think Bryan Kohberger's arrogance and his ego probably made him believe that he was better than law enforcement. I think eventually in time, he will be lost in obscurity and will actually want to do that. But I think he's too young and too naive and too arrogant right now to be interviewed, and to believe that he would actually give us accurate and reliable information at this point, I think is very low. Whereas Rex Heuermann is much closer to his own demise and was probably very happy that, having spent these months and months in prison or in jail pending his prosecution, that he's already very willing to be forthcoming.
Also, if you're here for the first time, please like and subscribe and share this video. If you've seen me before, thank you for coming back in, and please like and subscribe. When anyone subscribes, you automatically become part of my family. You're a member of my family, and me and Harley will love you to stay with us till the end. Harley's currently asleep on my bed at the moment, along with the cat. So she's not making an appearance anytime tonight, sadly. But what do people think about this way the officials have conducted themselves in dealing with this case? Because, Nancy Guthrie's case disappearance is still unresolved. The investigators, I think they had to sift through 40,000 tips or something. It is, I don't know how many people will be, in charge of going through every single tip that's going on. And then I read the other day, is Porch Guy being protected? That was done by an ex-FBI agent who raised an alarming theory in the Nancy Guthrie case. There's $1.2 million in rewards here, and it's still unclaimed. It's crazy, that amount of money. It's that 1.2 million is waiting for that one tip to come in that knows exactly where Nancy is, what's happened to her, who's culpable for doing this to Nancy, because we have to find it. And I'm sure the person involved is scouring all through the YouTube channels, watching to see what everyone might have on him. It's just terrible. Terrible. Sorry, I had a frog in my throat. So someone somewhere must know who this person is, and they're protecting them for whatever reason they're going on. And then former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, I've got her video thing. has been blunt in her assessment why Nat's Guthrie case appears to be frozen. She posted on X the 23rd of April. She's laid out several reasons she believes witnesses are staying quiet, centering on divided loyalties and deep mistrust in authorities. Let me see if I can go to that one. And then is it a video? Oh, it's a 1 hour video. I thought she just did a voice on it, but I'll carry on anyway because we're going to be here for a while.
He's also don't get me wrong. He's also very arrogant, and he's very sadistic. So that's going to be a very distasteful set of interviews, but it's probably going to go on for weeks.
Would you ever get nervous going in to do those? I'm just thinking, I mean, even as experienced as you are, like,
I'll tell you, Brian, every time I've walked into a max security prison and those gates close, and you realize that everyone on the same side of those gates does not like you, does not want you there, does not, really hates law enforcement, especially people who might have put them in prison. So yeah, of course, you're unarmed. You're at the mercy of whatever procedures or guards they have there. It's a tough situation, but again, it has helped us so much, so tremendously in solving these cases. And it's why I was able to profile the Gilgo Beach serial killer in 2011. I mean, many years before he was actually caught, but I was able to predict a significant number of his traits and behaviors and put together a profile that was fairly accurate, given only the information that was public. If I had the information that was behind the scenes, because I had retired by the time I was asked by the New York Times to do that profile. But when I did, it was based completely on that institutional knowledge we had built up over the years from doing these specific interviews and studying all those crime scenes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Really appreciate Jim for taking the time to talk with me. He's been so helpful in sort of understanding everything that's happened with the Nancy Guthrie case and what could be going on behind the scenes. I also spoke with Jim Fitzgerald and Ray Carr, also retired FBI profilers, about this process, about what it is like to go into these prisons and really try to profile someone and then use it in a case like Nancy Guthrie, an unsolved case like Nancy Guthrie. So I wanted to play you now my conversation with Jim Fitzgerald and Ray Carr. How do you think profilers are involved, in the old unit that used to work in at the FBI? How do you think they're involved right now?
I'm hoping they're.
I'm going to stop this one because I did play this one yesterday, all the day before. Just see if there's anything else, because there's no point doing the, two videos of the exact same video footage. Yeah, so we'll stop Brian from there. So if I stop sharing him, get rid of that tab. We'll go on to Jennifer Coffindaffer. If you can go to her YouTube page and X and wherever else she may be and follow Jennifer. Let's bring her page up. There we go. I love her hair. She's got lovely hair.
Welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. Let me tell you, this was one of the most interesting shows for me to prepare for. We are going to go over what the three, I would call one, absolutely one of the most prolific FBI agent profilers that is still alive, what he has to say about the Nancy Guthrie case. What another woman, never an FBI agent, but certainly a consultant, who kind of brought in sort of the medical and psychological abstract into profiling. And then finally, what the last one, he is a professor, PhD educator, never worked with the FBI, never worked as an FBI agent, but from the academic standpoint and from studying cases, what he has to say. Those are the three most, what I would call the people that I really, really value and wanted to hear what they had to say. And so anyway, we're going to talk about it because it's very interesting. It's also, I think, really important to understand the background of each of these individuals. I think that's really critically important because then you can decide what weight to give. Also, by some of the things they say, you can decide what weight to give in terms of what they know about the facts of the case. Because at the end of the day, what profilers look at are the facts. You have to look at the facts known for them to then sort of glean what you can take from known facts and glean into behavior you've seen profiled and so on in the past. So we're going to break it all down. I like I said, this was one of the most interesting shows I've ever prepared for. Perhaps because I know two of these individuals extremely well. One of them is a mentor of mine. Another of them has become a good friend over the years. Let me, first of all, I want to talk about what Ann Burgess has to say. And again, we're discussing Nancy Guthrie. I always think it's interesting to me when you look at this case, and so many are still saying it's cold, it's cold, it's cold. Even for me, somebody who is looking at this case through the lens of an advocator, somebody who is trying to put forth information to keep this obviously at the forefront, not wanting this case to go cold, wanting to educate as best I can in terms of everything I find on a case, also to just bring forward information that people might not know because they don't have time to do these crazy deep dives that we are doing every day on a daily basis on these cases. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not deep diving what is going on with Nancy Guthrie, what are people saying. Now, unfortunately, and I don't get down these crazy rabbit holes, but there's so many rabbit holes out there. You know, I've said it before. I always caution people, look at the creator who's bringing you the information, look at what they're really saying, look at whether they are backstopping it, meaning do they have the proof that stands behind something they say or something they put forward. That's another big thing, because all of you in audience, and that's why I love this true crime community. I love the X community. You're not just going to listen and move forward with what's being said. You want meat on the bone. And that's what we do here. We're going to discuss cases from a factual vantage. We're not a drama channel. A lot of people want the drama. And there's plenty of channels out there that will provide that for those who might be more interested in
That's a lovely
what I
picture,
call the
Nancy.
guiding light slash, you know, what
Let's
was
speed
that
her
other
up a
one? The
bit.
guiding light, General Hospital. You know, what has taken the place of those soap operas has become true crime. And so a lot of people love the conspiracy theories. They love anything that is negative towards somebody. They love to tear people down. It's crazy as I do my scrubs, I call them, every day on this case. And then I'll, you know, oh, something came up with Nancy Guthrie. Let me take a look over here. And I get about 3 minutes in and I'm just shaking my head and run away. But still, I always like to know what's going on with the conspiracy theorists. I like to know what's going on with people who are still indicting, if you will, on social media anyway, the family. I like to see where they're coming from. And I want to know if there's any proof. I want to give you an example of that. So recently here on this, on our channel, I saw somebody came forward, and I want to tell you, we just have the most amazing mods, right? So they're very good at backdooring me and letting me know, hey, you might want to take a look at this. Hey, this individual said this. This is truly a team effort with our mods and with our fact-finding crew in the back. We have a whole group of people that I will ask if they can look into this or that. And what I'm looking for is give me the fact basis. Show me the book that says this. Show me the interview where they said this. Show me a legal document where this was said. So when I come on and talk to you all, I know I have the facts behind me. But one of them was in regard to Tommaso and Annie. And specifically, they said that
this is always a hot topic when it comes to Tommaso and Annie. And like I said at the beginning of the video, people say that Savannah's responsible for Nancy's kidnapping because of her showbiz and the high sort of like in the know, she's very famous, I would say. But what if it was something that had totally gone wrong with Annie and her husband? Maybe, they ran into some trouble with the kidnapper. And if Tommy or Annie owe people, money on the back of the hand and they've never paid, maybe they thought, we'll take someone who's quite close to you and, let's hurt you that way. So that, I think, is still a possibility. I'm not sure. It's just my opinion.
Tommaso and Annie had not paid their taxes on their home. First of all, I was shocked at something. I just got to tell you, because they live in about a $600,000-$700,000 home. And I was shocked when I saw how much their taxes were. Their taxes are about $4,000 a year, $4,000 a year. Now, if you have ever lived in Florida, or if you've ever lived in Texas, and of course it's largely because we do not have state income tax in either of those states, the states where I, go back and forth between. It is shocking how low these taxes are. People who live in Texas and in Florida, you're paying an incredible amount. If you own $1 million home, you're paying at least minimum 10, 15 grand on that. If you own a $2 million home, you're paying upwards to $40,000, $50,000 a year. It's the Texas and the Florida taxes, same in Florida. It is absolutely unbelievable. And why it's really crazy is if you are in the instance of like Nancy Guthrie. Nancy Guthrie lived in this house since the 70s, everyone. She had this house for about 50 years. So while she bought it for $89,000, she bought the house for $89,000. And of course, now if you look, it's worth somewhere between $900,000 and about $1 million, which of course, I think whenever it comes to be sold, that will greatly be reduced because, people will know, unfortunately, that the terrible circumstances that happened in that house, right? And so nevertheless, you can see what this means to homeowners like Nancy. It's so unfair. So if you originally bought a house for $89,000 50 years ago, and now your house is worth $1 million, you're going to be taxed at the current rate. Yes, you get to homestead, so you get a little bit off of it, and they can only raise it by about 3% each year. But nevertheless, you are absolutely taxed on the value of that home now, not from 1970s. So this is why it's, extremely difficult, and why a lot of people, for instance, in Florida, and I'm not trying to wane too much about what our show is about today, but why people, for instance, in Florida, the governor of Florida is moving to make taxes on homeowners that we don't have to pay any homeowners taxes. What he wants to do is he wants to take that from sales. In other words, you buy a boat, it's going to be increased by a couple percentage points, no matter what you buy, a gallon of milk, shoes, a boat, you're going to have to pay increased by, I think, 1 to 2%, he said, to make up for homeowners taxes. Of course, everybody wants that. And he's doing it because he sees how unfair it is to somebody who purchased a home when they were younger, and then now they're in their 80s and they're having to pay ridiculous amounts. Now in Arizona, I have just come to find out the taxes are really, really, really low. So, that's a good thing. But essentially how they do it in Arizona is you can pay in 2 parts. So you can pay initially at one deadline half, and then at the other deadline, the other half. So in October of 2025, Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni paid the first half, which was around $2,000, a little bit over $2,000. They paid that first half. And then the second half was due in March 1st. From my research, it seems they did not pay the second $2,000-ish. It was due May 1st is kind of their final cutoff where it's considered delinquent. So I'll have to go back and look because March 1st was yesterday. I'm sorry, May 1st was yesterday. If you're late past March 1st, there are penalties you have to pay, but you're not considered fully delinquent until May 1st, at least from my research. So, but a lot of people were trying to say, see, they didn't pay their taxes. Well, they didn't tell everybody. In other words, every day I'm trying to find out, why does everybody think that Tommaso and Annie are so guilty? I wish I had a picture of them up here in my library. I don't have a picture of them up here in my library today, but nevertheless, I just wanted to touch on this point, and it comes into play when we're looking at what these different profilers have said about the Nancy Guthrie case. So I just wanted to touch on, for those that continue to blame Annie and Tommaso, and they're saying that, see, they needed the money as if they have some huge tax debt. It appears to me that it was $2,000. And I also want to say that if there was an extension that was asked for beyond, we know that it was paid, the first half was paid in October of 2025. If there was an extension that was asked for, that likely would not be public record. I don't see any extensions like that publicly. What we could see is when taxes are paid and how much is paid and how much is due, and we can see certain general deadlines. So no one really knows. But I can tell you, we are not talking about some huge astronomical debt. And I just thought it was unfair, as I was reviewing and scrubbing a little bit this morning, that people were trying to make this point. And somebody, legitimately, people are asking, well, is it true? In other words, are they in money debt? And somehow knocking off Nancy caused them to be out of money debt. I don't want to get down that rabbit trail because today is Profiler Day. But I just wanted to remark that when you say something in chat, a lot of that is circled back to me, especially legitimate concerns, claims, things you want answered. And so we look into that. So I appreciate all your questions. I appreciate when you have a different opinion. It's all good to, in my opinion, to have different opinions. Whenever I was in leadership roles, both at the FBI and it's always been the FBI because that's my whole background, but at the FBI in different capacities, right? Whether I was a supervisor, whether I was an SSRA, whether I was an SRA, or whether I was a case agent and I had a crew. So my largest crew ever was 10 agents assigned to me as the case agent. The supervisor doesn't want anything to do with all of that. That they delegate that down, and you're assigned to how you individually task each of those 10 people on your crew. So no matter what leadership responsibility I had in the FBI, in each of those cases, you look at what needs to be done, and you want to fulfill the concerns, and that's how I still think of it here. Whether it's on YouTube or whether it's on Twitter, I don't know. I don't get paid. I shouldn't say that, because YouTube, obviously, because of you all having more subscribers and everything. I remember I joked around, and it wasn't a joke, but I joked with my husband about this, that for all the time I spent, I made, and I just bring this up, not for you to feel sorry for me, but just how funny it really is, about $16 an episode, which is so funny. Now, of course, because of you all, and because I'm able to set a set time and really try to come on at 10 a.m. every morning, we have become so much more successful. And I thank each of you. And what that has meant for me is I can certainly have more people come help, and more people I think are interested in helping. We have the best mods. We always have had. They are amazing. And I think part of the reason that they are so amazing is they see it as part of a team and wanting to build something successful and something that's worthwhile. So now that I've completely digressed, let's get on to, and this is so funny, I'll look at the comments later and I'll see where she says. She starts talking about Nancy at this time frame. So we're ready to get into it. So here we go. I want to first talk about Ann Burgess. And we can't talk about Ann Burgess without truly understanding what Ann Burgess did for and with the FBI, and what she's all about. So let's talk about her first, okay? So Ann Burgess, I want to make it clear, was never an FBI agent. She never served as an FBI agent. She never, I don't know if she ever tried to be an FBI agent. I wouldn't have doubted that she might have wanted to do that. But her background was actually in nursing, but specifically what they call a forensic nurse and professor. So her education was as a nurse. And obviously, she was also a professor. But what she was, and this, a lot of people don't know this, but in the Bureau, there are professionals that are completely private that help the Bureau. And that's what I've been saying. I am certain is going on right now with the investigation concerning both the cryptocurrency, aka Bitcoin, and also the emails. There's 6 emails that were sent from the abductor or abductors of Nancy Guthrie that the Bureau is trying to trace. Yes, do we have some of the best in the FBI? Yes, we do, in terms of forensic gathering of digital evidence and being able to understand how not only money, but how emails are tracked and so forth. I've discussed over and over again that what the roadblocks are likely. I say that they're likely based on the fact that we have no results after 90 days, it would seem, that point to a suspect being arrested. Well, we know that, right? Nobody's been charged. Nobody's been arrested. It remains unsolved. And part of the reasons that these emails cannot be traced is because emails can be, you can use VPNs. We all know about those. I have a VPN. I'm sure many of you have VPNs. And that reduces the ability to trace back the IP address. Number 2, you can have email addresses that are from foreign entities. In other words, they're German, they're Swedish, particularly, they're Swiss. And when you have that, it makes it very difficult for law enforcement to get that information from a foreign entity. And most of those countries put privacy of their citizenry well above what we do. In other words, we lean a little bit toward, listen, we can invade people's privacy when it comes to criminal activity. If you're involved in criminal activity, we can overhear your phones. We can get subpoenas to look at, the DNA you've submitted to 23andMe when you're talking about a quadruple homicide, things like that. Whereas in other countries, in a lot of ways, everyone, that is guarded. It's really heavily guarded. And if they stop doing that, they would really lose the conviction of their citizenry, because that's the kind of country they want to live in. Remember, during the Holocaust, when everything was taken from the Jewish people, much of that went to Swiss banks, and it was kept very secretive. And that was a big deal. So this is not something new. It's something very well known. And so nevertheless, there are all these safeguards. The other thing is public Wi-Fi. You can do so much on public Wi-Fi, it will never go back to you. It'll go back to Starbucks. And then somebody has to try to figure out who was at Starbucks at that time that might have used it. But again, I've talked about the other 2 layers, like the VPN as well as the foreign emails. So I think you are talking about literally something that sophisticated for the FBI to not have already cracked, who sent 6 emails, people, 6 emails.
So with Jennifer Coffinafer, I think that's pronounced right. She's a former FBI agent and has expressed on many occasions her concerns about Nancy Guthrie's case, particularly in regarding handling of the investigations by law enforcement. She's also criticized the cloak and dagger approach used by investigators, which she believes hinders the public's ability to assist in the case. Coffindaffer also pointed out that the investigation involves a significant amount of evidence that is not publicly disclosed, suggesting that the FBI knows more than the public does. She has called for more transparency and has shared her thoughts through one of her podcasts and social media platforms. So, like I was said at the beginning, FBI and the investigators can't let general public know everything there is about the case. Hence why we've not seen any crime scene photos within the house. They're keeping that one closely to their chest. They're not going to tell everybody everything and spoil it, just in case the people involved in this are actually watching us. They're watching what we say, what we move. And they're going to be covering the news channels like TMZ very carefully. But let's get on.
To 3 different news stations. I've talked about that they went to 2 Tucson local stations. Another reason why many of us that have been following this case highly believe that This case is well related to somebody in and around this area. And this was to humiliate this family that has a huge footprint in Tucson. You look at the technology involved with this group, it makes, or group or person, it makes it quite clear that we are talking about a lot of sophistication. And when you look at the profilers in their evaluation, they are absolutely looking into all of these situations for them to help understand the profile of the people involved. And by the way, I see these comments down here, and they are so nice. Thank you so much again for understanding this issue that came up with the electricity. I will, on the YouTube, I can go back and cut this out. I've never had when is on the streets in some way. All of that, your risk of being victimized is huge, either for being robbed, for sexually assaulted, for being beaten. All of these crimes now, you now have a huge risk component. When I teach classes, and I'm teaching one on Sunday, actually to the gay community, which I'm excited to do a class for them. When you look at the victimology as an example of the gay community, it is high. Jewish community, it is high. That's just facts. And what the first part of any class I do before we go hands-on is I talk about how can we reduce the chance of becoming a victim. So that's literally what we go through. We go through an entire recipe to make your chances for becoming a victim. That's what this case has done, right? Nancy Guthrie, her neighbors, her people she played mahjong with, her family, her religious group. I mean, how true is that? Total power and control over those in her circle. That's what this has done, because they're all concerned. They're out of control. They can't find her. No one can find Nancy. No one can.
We're on the right page. Shown a minute. Let's get there. We go. Beg your pardon, guys. It's what you have when you have far too many tabs open. Let's make sure we're watching the first one. So this is the approximate timeline. So 5:32, Nancy travels to family's home. 9:48. Excuse me. Family drops Nancy off at home, and the garage door opens. 9:50. 2 minutes later, the garage door closes. 1:47 a.m. Doorbell camera disconnects. 2:12 a.m. Software detects the person on the camera. 2:28. The pacemaker app shows it's disconnected from the phone. 11:56 a.m. Family checks on Nancy. 3 minutes past 12. 911 call to Pima County Sheriff's Department. And 12:15, the patrol arrives.
This is more in keeping with statistics regarding abductions and how quick they are in and how quick they are out. She says, so I'm sorry, to be clear, she doesn't say the house was turned upside down. Actually, that's somebody else. She says, but this is what she does say. She says something went wrong inside the house. And I think okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to stick with her. I keep wanting to editorialize because I like a lot of what she has to say. She says something went wrong inside the house. Wrong meaning that the plan was awry, that the plan became awry. She says the purpose, again, I mean, she was specific in, was to inflict pain on others. All right. So to just kind of recap her thoughts: targeted. This was about money. This wasn't about sex. I'm sorry. This was about money. This was about a grudge. This was about a retaliation. This was to inflict pain. This was to practice power and control over her social circle, that something went wrong inside, she believes, that there's more than one perpetrator, and that Savannah was the key, and there was prior planning. So that is, in a nutshell, the generalities of what the facts are telling Ann Burgess. What facts support what Ann Burgess has to say? Well, we know there was blood on the stoop. That would show us that something likely went wrong there from a physical standpoint. When you look at what has happened, certainly power and control and to inflict pain on those that loved her and were in her circle, that's already happened. So that's where she's getting that from. No sexual assault or reason for this crime. We've all pretty much said that. And that is sort of corroborated if we believe the source information that the house wasn't very much disturbed. If there would have been this huge sexual event, there would be more DNA. You know, we wouldn't just be working with one rootless hair and possibly some other mixed DNA from touch DNA. So when you look at that, that makes a lot of sense. She doesn't think this was a sex-motivated crime. Prior planning, we know that now, right? Because of the 11th that's been pointed out, the night before that's been pointed out. I've seen the 24th be pointed out, but I have to tell you, I cannot find any corroboration of that. All I can find is about one neighbor mentioning, that. So again, if I can't find it, like for instance, on the 11th, that has been corroborated from Pima County Sheriff. It's been corroborated from Savannah Guthrie and the whole Guthrie family, and it's been pointed out by witnesses. So I have a trifecta of belief that the 11th was critical. And then we also have the photo of Porch Guy, where Porch Guy is not in his proper outfit. He doesn't have his gun, he doesn't have his holster, and he doesn't have his backpack. And he has different shoes, I believe, and a different shirt. So all of that would lend itself to believe another day. And then also the lighting is different. And on the 11th, I pointed out this was I believe, a waning crescent, and it was a full moon on the 1st when she was abducted. All right, so a lot. As to why, what's making them tick. Can we lend her expertise to him many times? I talked to him often. Just talked to him a couple of days ago. When I say talked, communicated, we're big texters. And I want to go through what he had to say. Now, he was asked by TMZ to talk. And so he went on TMZ, and this is what he has to say. He says that this is a situation of practicing ownership over a victim, that Porch Guy does a good job of minimizing his chances of being caught because of when he went, so forth. In other words, Bricado called this a high risk. Oh gosh, I forgot to go through his bona fides. Let me quickly go through Gary's background. And by the way, I'm not calling him Gary out of disrespect for him being a PhD. I'm calling him that because he tells me to call him Gary. All right, his background. He went undergrad to Columbia, and then he got his PhD from the New School of Social Research in New York. Now, I hear it called the New School now, but it was the New School of Social Research. Guys, that's hard to say. The New School for Social Research. And I want to say, personally, I had never heard of that school. Just, personally. But again, I was never looking for a school to go to get a PhD in psychology. And that's what his degree is in, to be clear. He has a PhD in clinical psychology from the New School for Social Research. I still don't know why I can't say that. It's like Sally sells seashells down by the seashore. He's trained at numerous New York institutions, the Creedmoor Psychiatric Center and the Zucker Hillside Hospital Center. He focuses in on attenuated psychosis syndrome, which essentially I think is early psychosis, how people become psychotic early. He has a big background in studying serial, mass, and spree killers. In fact, he told me that he has looked at every single case of mass murder that has ever been committed here and abroad. So big background there. He has served as the assistant director of COPE for about 7 years, not since 2021. He oversaw research on early psychosis and potential violence risk. So in a nutshell, his expertise and his area of study, from my understanding, both from what I've read and then from conversations with him, is a lot sort of trying to identify early on individuals who would be prone to committing crime, like psychosis as a young person. That's sort of his area, that mass murder, serial murder. And like I said, to me, the really interesting part is that sort of early on. He's been a visiting scholar at Boston College in researching forensic topics like homicide and mutilation. It's interesting because I've had a lot of interesting communication with him regarding this and about how, from understanding from doing the job, and he understands from studying, right, how things have happened, that mutilation, and I pointed this out on the Celeste Rivas case, it's because it's necessary for the most part. Believe me, I'm not saying that with everybody. I mean, Bundy, he was something else, and took enjoyment from things that are nightmares. But most of the time, it's because you mutilate somebody because you want to get a ring off their finger. You want to take their finger that has the tattoo of your name. You need to get them in the front. You need to get them in a barrel. You need to get them in a confined space. You want to mutilate them, in other words, dismember, so you can scatter them. So it's more difficult when you have a body part here, a body part there, a body part someplace else. So typically, that's why people mutilate. It's not because of this enjoyment you get. And that's not to say some people don't get enjoyment, because I really believe they do. But typically, it's because it's a pragmatic reason. So anyway, he studied that. He operates within the Clarity Therapy Clinic in New York City. That's where to find him now, is my understanding. You know, he still works with helping individuals. Okay. So that, I just wanted to give you a flavor that while he doesn't have a law enforcement background, he was never an agent, he never worked the cases, he studied the cases that occurred. That's what he did. And that's what his expertise is in. So he went, or TMZ contacted him, and he went on TMZ, and I want to give you what he has to say. Again, ownership over the victim, minimize chances of getting caught. He had a high reward, meaning what he wanted to do was going to be accomplished compared to the low risk based on what he did. He believes firmly that there is, he called it a group of people involved, but he says at least two, a group of people, but at least two. And that there's two different levels operating here, sort of the dummy or the puppet and the puppeteer. How he describes it, though, I'm using puppet and puppeteer, did not use that. I want to use his words, waiter and chef. So he says there's a waiter in this case and a chef in this case. And he believes, obviously, that the waiter in this case is porch guy. He says this is the waiter. So he says that there's somebody behind the curtain. He calls it the curtain, which is the chef. The chef's behind the curtain of what happened. And he describes porch guy as a hired goon. He says he's psychopathic in character, that he's the waiter, not intelligent, not scheming, but basically he's hired to do, and Gary calls it a gig. He says he's called a gig. It's a gig. It's a job. That's what he says about Porch Guy. It's just a job. He's going out there to do it. He says that likely he did it for financial reasons. He was hired. He says this crime wasn't about sex or robbery, but that's what he believes. He really, oh, sorry. I want to stay on for a minute, even though it was out of order how he said this. I want to stay on what he says about Porch Guy. He calls him cool, experienced, callous, detached, local knowledge of the victim, ego issues. He's saying that this person, if you know him outside of Porch Guy, that he would be quick to temper, that he is a narcissist, that he's a grudge holder, that he is likely intersected with the drug world. Things like sex workers or drugs, I should say underworld. That's what he expects, that when they find Porch Guy, that is going to be what he's all about. Cool, experienced, in other words, he means having committed other crimes. Callous, detached, local to the community, knowledgeable about the victim, huge ego, extreme anger issues, narcissist, big temper, grudge holder, and likely was around the underworld such as in the drug or sex worker community. And I really hope that you're doing what I'm doing, is really comparing and contrasting what Ann Burgess says and what Gary Bricado says, because in a lot of ways they're very different. A lot of ways they're very, very different. But there are certain threads that are interwoven. And I think the reason that they're different in so many ways is because they come from very different backgrounds. They really come from a different age. You know, if you look, Gary Bricado is young compared to Ann Burgess, and she did the lion's share of her work, 70s, 80s, early on in the early development of all of this. And Gary is more recent, where he likes to analyze cases going on now and things like that. So anyway, I just found the juxtaposition, if you will, between the two profiles or psychological profiles to be quite astounding in a sense. Because although, like I said, there are some interwoven threads, I thought their overall psychological profile was just so much different. Talked about the person behind the camera. He said, or behind the curtain, he says that person's a schemer. They live a double life. They're very intelligent. They're very cunning. They can seem caring, but they're really not. And they, were obviously focused on hurting Nancy. So these are very, very different profiles. But when I say that, Gary does offer up that this could be an abduction gone bad. He does offer that up sort of, as a side. But what he spends the majority of his time on, and you can tell, at least in my opinion, what he thinks happened, he describes it in detail. He says, from studying these, that this is what you call an elimination murder. Now, an elimination murder, and this is I'll give you the example he gives, is, for those of you who know Susan Smith, right? Susan Smith, she wanted to have a life with another guy. So romantically, he wasn't into the fact that she had 2 small children. So what she did was she drove her car with them strapped in it and drowned them in a little lakeish pondish area. And so she does that. And then she comes on and cries and says, oh, it was a stranger that did it. So Dr. Bricado is saying that he thinks it could be an elimination murder, where actually the whole reason behind the murder was not what the murder would seem. He even goes on to say that this could be, that she could have been killed. Okay, so let me be clear. He says the motive wasn't abduction. I mean, this is his main theory. He says there's 2. He always caveats it, or it could be an abduction gone bad. But what he spends all his time discussing is an elimination murder, and that in fact she could have been killed someplace else. That was probably the biggest thing that he said that is off what anybody has said. Killed someplace else. And then whoever did this staged the murder, including the blood drops, the doors being open. He talks all about that, okay? And that the 2 ransom notes that we know about, he says that's just part of it. That's part of making it look like it's an abduction gone wrong. That it's basically, he says that this is caveating again. He does mention at least once. He caveats it with, this could just be a kidnapping gone bad, the Occam's razor that I always talk about. But that this is an elimination murder, killed someplace else, staged to look like an abduction. It's not an abduction. The ransom notes are fake. The blood is fake. The doors being open fake. And that the victim was never there. That's what he says. And he believes that everyone involved is from Tucson. He believes, again, that this was made to look like an abduction, but it's not. He says these murders are done for one of 2 reasons. Typically, one is very emotional, like you loathe them. So this would be somebody that actually hated Nancy Guthrie. Someone is in the, these are the 4 reasons that these types of murders are done. Someone's in the way, like with the Susan Smith that he talked about, that those kids were in the way of her having this romantic affair. They witnessed something that's embarrassing, or otherwise would be bad. Or, and then I starred this because this was the last what he said. He took a lot of time with it. Someone that is a burden to them and they are tired of being taken care of. He thinks whoever did this knew the victim. He thinks it was, again, financial, likely not sex or robbery. I think that pretty much sums it up. So again, he touches on, this could just be an abduction gone wrong, but he talks about the elimination murder. Murdered someplace else, wasn't even in the house, everything is staged, blood on the front porch, that's all staged, blah, 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 that all of that is staged. Again, I never ever discuss what Gary, Dr. Picato and I talk about personally, and he never discusses what I talk about him personally. So anything I am saying right now is strictly from his TMZ. He did an interview with TMZ to answer Mike's question. So go on TMZ, you'll find it. These are my copious.
That's nice when you got the actual facts and not presume so or possibly, and that. So it's good Jennifer gets her facts when she does anything like these
notes. And essentially that's what he thinks. It's, you know, I'm an Occam's razor girl. I've said that from the beginning. That has always, whether it's been in my analysis of these cases, served me very well. And then certainly as an FBI agent, you have to keep your mind open to any possibility. And could this be a possibility? It's a possibility. It's not an Occam's razor. This is the opposite of Occam's razor. This is the very involved, multiple aspects to it. You know, this is opposite of Occam's razor. Occam's razor.
We have Jay from Guilty of Crime in the room. Welcome, Jay. Thank you for coming in. Oops, messing up. I can't play it now.
There is person goes in, means to abduct her, she dies, and the person's motive is primarily, in my opinion, in this case, retaliation against the family, money. It all goes wrong. You continue to hurt the family through these 2 letters that are followed up with. And I think they have a huge, and I've said this, social media presence to help spin that either nothing happened or that the family's involved. I think they're very much involved on social media. And I hope law enforcement is looking at who could be their personas on social media, spinning things away from them. But I wanted to go over what Dr. Picato thinks, because I like Gary a lot, and I think he offers a very unique perspective. And this case is solved. It'll be interesting to see, was he right? Was he wrong? Was she murdered someplace else? Was the goal murder, which is what he's saying? It's an elimination murder, and then everything at that house was staged. Now, let's talk about, just like we did with Anne, what are the facts that support his premise and what are the facts that don't support it? I think the facts that don't support this premise are, if we believe the sheriff specifically said that from the beginning, their understanding of the motive has never changed. In other words, that it was a kidnapping for ransom. Okay, that's what he says. We see the actions of the family. We see the actions of the FBI. We see 5 or 4 emotional and 1 not necessarily emotional pleading from the family to the abductors. So clearly the FBI would not stage anything like that if they didn't believe it was that. Now, I want to make it clear, again, that Gary Bricata specifically says it could be that, just what we just talked about, the Occam's razor side. But he offers this other opinion that I think is very unique to him. And it'll be interesting to see if he's right here. There are certain things that don't make a lot of sense that would explain from his vantage point. For instance, why open 2 doors? Was that part of being staged? A lot of people have had issue with the blood. Why, even if there was, and Mac and I have talked about it from the beginning, that only one person, that the goal of Porch Guy was to take her through that front door and gone. I've always said, from my point of view, she never walked 1 step. He grabbed her, gagged her, put a hood over her head, and threw her over his shoulder and took her out. That's what I've always thought. And so that leaves only one person with footsteps on the porch. And we could see by the blood, there's nothing squashing in and out through the blood. This was something Mac and I discussed months ago. And that it doesn't make any sense that there was a whole tribe of people taking her out, because there's just nothing.
Well, I'll interrupt Jennifer. I just was seeing, where was it? Oh, I've lost my feed now. Here we go. Nope. Bear with me, guys. Sort of like they're saying that Nancy Guthrie's update, ex-FBI official, gives bombshell on suspect, not a stranger. So after 88 days of disappearance, Nancy Guthrie still has no suspect officially identified so far, and there is no breakthrough in the case. They're still working on the DNA. However, a former senior federal official believes this may not be as mysterious as it seems. Speaking on the Fairfax Files, which is hosted by Michael Hirschman, former FBI director John Miller suggested that the person responsible is likely to be someone familiar with the victim's surroundings. Nancy, the 84-year-old mother of Savannah, was last seen on the 31st of January. So it's just over 3 months now. Miller had wanted to say that he pointed to a strong possibility that the crime was planned locally. I think the answer is, and I think that the Guthrie family believes this too, the answer is right there in Tucson, who told the parade. This is probably something hatched locally by someone who thought, here's an individual who's relatively defenseless, lives alone, is so vulnerable, unable to put up a lot of resistance. If we came and took her away, who's connected? Someone with resources and money, he added. He explains that in many kidnapping cases, suspects often have some kind of connection to the victim, such as being a former employee or someone linked to an employee or a person who had access to the home or property. He doesn't think this case is going to be vastly different, Miller stated to others. He added it was likely to be someone local, had enough contact around the house and access to what he would like, and had some idea of the nightmarish dream. We're all going to be demanding money and we're all going to do it in crypto. That was his words that he spoke to a local news source. But like I said, I will do this in a part 2.
So to Dr. Gary Bricata's point, the blood there lends itself to believe that nobody traipsed through it. And so one might ask, how could even Porch Guy have avoided traipsing through the mud or through the blood, right? How could he have even avoided that? If she was bleeding at the time he carries her off, how could he avoid not smudging it? Okay. So I think that the back doors being open and that could support.
And also, like I said yesterday, my one I did, with Nancy's front door being so wide, I would have thought it's still quite difficult for Portsmouth Guy to be side by side to Nancy with her face low enough to the ground for the blood splatter the way it did, for them both to get through that door at the same time. You know, I know our doors in the UK are a lot smaller than here. So you know, you definitely couldn't get two people through one of ours. But judging by Nancy's door, it's hard to say by photos, but I still think it'd be quite hard for two people to actually get through that door together at the same time when one of them is being, you know, hushed away and round, or being, you know, Nancy's head being lower to the ground and hunched over.
His position. That, in other words, the whole thing was staged. But this is an elaborate Cecil B. DeMille, I'll call it. This is an elaborate The Godfather type production. If that if he ends up being right, and that's the case, this is elaborate, everyone. This really, really is. Because you're talking about a guy that you get to go up on that porch, to snatch the camera, to mess with the weeds, to, you know, take her, or no, not take her, sorry, she's dead, but to fake going in, to be seen on that camera at 2:12. Remember? So you're faking a lot. So we'll see if that works out. But you know, you heard it on TMZ first. If he ends up being right about this, it's a unique perspective. And again, he's a scholar who has studied murder and psychosis. He's a psychologist, PhD in psychology. And so that's his background, and he lends his perspective. Finally, I want to go on to my mentor, friend, Greg McCrary. Okay. Oh gosh, I want to respond to this really quick before we go on. For anyone saying that any high statistic of elderly abductions is the family, they are absolutely wrong. So please don't get caught up in that. When it comes to murders of individuals being committed by the family, there's a graduated scale. And basically for younger people, yes. I mean, it's statistically more problematic that if you are murdered in your house as a child, a young person, it's statistically, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, somebody who isn't able to drive, you are statistically, it's more often a family member, a friend, somebody very close in your inner circle. When you are talking about abductions, it's also very high for kids because most abductions of children are parental abductions. Those are the ones that I have a lot of my background in. Parental abductions, parental kidnappings. So those stats are skewed that way. But when you are talking about a woman in their 80s, first of all, that is at the lowest of the low. It's below 1% of all people who are abducted. Again, the largest quantity are those individuals that are young and parental kidnapping cases. As far as stranger, which I wouldn't even call stranger, but another area of kidnappings that are more predominant are those that are in the cartel, narcotic, gang type related, that are specifically over money or revenge, right? You ripped me off of my 2 kilos. You looked wrong at my girl. I heard you rub my girl's feet. I'm just kidding. That's from Pulp Fiction. That's why, you know, in that movie that they say they threw one of the gangsters off the roof or off the balcony because he gave somebody a foot massage. And then I love that movie, by the way. Call me gross. No, I love that movie because it shows how the reality of crime becomes normalized to criminals. And this is what I always saw. And so things that you wouldn't imagine people can joke about, they joke about. It becomes very normal. And
I can imagine everyone that watches crime stuff on YouTube and YouTube creators creating content on crime, I'm sure we're the perfect people to get away with the perfect crime. We would know how not to leave DNA behind. You know, we would just, I think we could get away with the perfect murder and not get caught at all.
And it's kind of difficult to really understand that premise, but how I explain it is just think of all the things that are normal in your life. It's normal to drop your kids off. It's normal to bake dinner. It's normal to play mahjong. It's normal to sweep. It's all these things that are normal, right? That are your life. Well, when your life is a life of crime, of killing people, of handling drugs, of extorting people, of beating people up, of dealing with, you know, sex workers, that's where you get your, you know, satisfaction there of being high. When all that becomes normal, imagine your daily norm of what you joke around about and what is just, that is a norm that in Pulp Fiction they talk about. And so I'm just trying to point out that the different norms that are established and that people like Gary Piccata, people like Ann Burgess, people like Greg McCrary, this is what they study and become familiar with. I want to go over Greg's background. I never do a good job going over Greg's background. Again, Greg McCrary one of the first FBI profilers, along with Ressler and John Douglas. They were FBI agents. He's a retired profiler. He worked in the behavioral science unit. It didn't become the name behavioral analysis unit till much, much later. When I was first an agent, it was the behavioral science unit. It changed to the behavioral analysis unit. They're the same units, but now there's many more facets of the overarching unit. There's just, in my opinion, no one more of an expert than Greg. He keeps a pretty low profile, but what he has done after he retired from being an FBI agent, he became an expert witness. And he is literally he's doing it. Instead of just talking about it on air or on a podcast, he does the work. He's sitting in a courtroom explaining from a profiler's vantage point why this perpetrator did what they did, or what his premise is on the case. That he did it for decades. He did it in the Bureau. And then for decades, he did it studying cases and then testifying about them. You will see him on different news mediums. You'll still see him. Like I said, we are so blessed. He's been on our show 3 times, talked about 3 different cases. He extensively talked about Nancy Guthrie with us for over 2 hours, which was so nice of him to analyze the case, spend the time to look at it, and then come on and talk to us, because he gets about $600 an hour for his expert work. So very nice of him to come on. Again, like I said, I love having the doers on. He's a doer. He's been accepted by multiple courts as an expert in his field of profiling. So think so much of him. He was a consultant. He and John Douglas, on the Netflix series Mindhunter, a paid consultant. He also had the behind the scenes role of Greg Smith. So basically, Greg Smith, who's in that Netflix series, is him. They even spell it with 2 G's at the end, for those of you who didn't know that. So if you've ever watched that, John Douglas is kind of the main role, and then Greg McCrary is Greg Smith on that. That character is fashioned after him, and that's why Greg McCrary consulted him on that. Let's see, anything. I mean, he consulted for the Silence of the Lambs. He was one of the people, and that's why, of course, you see that in this case, the Silence of the Lamb terminology was utilized by Nancy or Savannah Guthrie when they were pleading to the kidnappers, because they have found things like that to work in the past. Talk to her and you'll see. Those were the exact words used not only on Silence of the Lambs, who Greg consulted on, but also used in this case. That's his background. Right, now he's mostly retired from the expert work, but he just can't get out of it. He's so funny. Just can't get out of it. The offender has the close connection. So that's what what I took away from his main point. It doesn't mean Nancy had the close connection, but that the offender had the close connection and was delusional in this one-sided relationship.
Well, it got to be delusional.
That it was very deliberate and planned. This wasn't something that he said, and we know that, well, okay, I'll go through the facts that support Greg later. That deliberate and planned. This wasn't somebody that said, oh my gosh, she just pissed me off. I'm going to go over there and abduct her or kill her. I'm going to take her.
I'm too.
No. He's saying quite the opposite of that. Quite the opposite of that. Deliberate, planned. That was the key risk factor for her. In other words, completely low risk, other than you have a famous daughter worth $40 million. We learned that. We learned how true that was with the Brian Koberger case. Again, different deal. I understand that's a mass murder that I would say was a fledgling serial killer. In this case, I believe this is an abductor. Greg McCrary says retribution, received or perceived or otherwise. In other words, it's his perceived retribution of a wrongdoing. He says, and Ann Burgess says this too, they both say this, and I know they did not collaborate on this because I talked to Greg well before Ann Burgess ever spoke on it, that Savannah is the key. Burgess says Savannah is the key, and Greg McCrary says Savannah was the key risk factor for her. In other words, completely low risk, other than you have a famous daughter worth $40 million. So very important there. He says, Greg McCrary says that whoever did this had very specific details about Nancy in the house. This wasn't somebody who wasn't educated on the area, the property, and on Nancy. That pretty much sums up Greg, what Greg had to say. Again, if you look at Greg and Ann, their psychological profiles of this occurrence are almost lockstep. Pretty
Right.
much
I
lockstep.
think we'll leave it there because she hasn't got a lot more to say. I will be doing a part 2 tomorrow. I just didn't realise how long everything would take tonight. So, because it's now what? Can't even read that time. Bear with me, guys. Just gone 10:30 at night. Yeah, so I'm going to label the title to this as part 1 in the title, and then I will be back tomorrow at some point to do part 2. When I know a definite time, it'll probably be late morning, very early afternoon. I will do a pre-live notification. So if you've got all your notifications set to all, as soon as I go live, you get to know. So I'd like to say thanks to those who popped in today, and for our famous Jay. Nice of her to drop in. Yeah, so I hope you all have a nice weekend wherever you are. And let me know in the thoughts what you think happened, what your ideas are, because everyone's going to have different ideas of what happened. It's like everyone's saying this is linked to Savannah. It quite possibly could be linked to Annie. You know, maybe they did something to upset somebody and that's their revenge. So, right, thanks for coming in. I do appreciate it. If you can, on your way out, click like, subscribe if you haven't, and share. I appreciate it all. Right, till the next one, guys. I'm out of here.